Getting my first job wasn't easy. I'd applied everywhere, cafes, supermarkets, gas stations, and fast food joints, but no one called me back. Bills were piling up and my parents were tired of me lounging around. Finally, one place gave me a chance. Wendy's on Maple Avenue in Greenville. They needed someone to work the night shift. I didn't have a choice. It wasn't my dream job, but money was money. My first day was a Friday night. I pulled into the empty parking lot at 10:45 p.m. The red Wendy sign buzzed faintly and one of the streetlights outside flickered. My car rattled as I parked. For some reason, my chest felt tight, like something wasn't right. I shook it off, grabbed my bag, and headed to the door. Inside, the restaurant looked spotless, so clean it felt unnatural. The floors sparkled under the fluorescent lights, and the air smelled like cleaning supplies mixed with grease. A tall man stood behind the counter. His uniform was neat and his name tag read, Brian, Manager. He looked to be in his 40s with short, gray-streaked hair and sharp eyes that seemed to study me too closely. "You must be Kevin," he said, reaching out for a handshake. "That's me," I replied, forcing a smile. His handshake was firm but cold, and it sent a chill down my spine. "Good," Brian said, nodding. "Let me show you around." He walked me through the place, explaining how to work the fryer, use the cash register, and clean up. Everything felt normal until he led me to the office. The small room had a desk buried in paperwork, but the security monitors caught my eye. They showed every corner of the restaurant. "Before you start, there are a few rules," Brian said, shutting the door. His voice dropped and his eyes narrowed. "Rules?" I asked, confused. "Listen carefully," he said. "They're for your safety." Brian's tone grew colder as he continued explaining the rules. "Rule 1, there's a pistol in the cash register. You probably won't need it, but if something unusual happens, it's there." My stomach dropped. "Wait, why would I need a gun here? It's just a Wendy's." Brian ignored my question. "Rule 2, if anyone comes in after midnight asking too many questions, keep your answers short. You're here to work, not to chat." Rule 3, if you hear noises from the kitchen or the freezer, don't investigate. Just stay focused on your tasks. I swallowed hard. What kind of noises? "Things you don't want to find out," Brian snapped. His eyes locked onto mine, making my skin crawl. "Final rule. If a car pulls up to the drive-thru after midnight, go outside and tell them we're closed. Don't let anyone stay there long, and lock the door when you come back in." Before I could ask anything else, the office door swung open and a woman in her late 20s stepped in. Her uniform was wrinkled and her dark hair was tied in a loose ponytail. "This the new guy?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Kevin, meet Rachel," Brian said. "She'll be on cash tonight. Jason's in the back working the grill." Rachel gave me a quick once-over. "First night, huh? Good luck." Her tone was sarcastic, but I caught a hint of something else. Was it worry? I didn't have time to think about it. The clock struck midnight and the first car rolled into the drive-thru. Rachel nudged me. "Go on," she said. "It's your turn." With a deep breath, I stepped outside into the thick, humid air. The car in the drive-thru sat idle, its headlights off. I approached cautiously, the humid night air clinging to my skin. Tapping on the driver's window, I forced a polite smile. "Sorry, we're closed." The driver, a scruffy man in his 40s, turned his head slowly to look at me. His face was worn and his dark eyes studied me for a long, uncomfortable moment. "Closed, huh?" he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Yeah," I replied, stepping back slightly. "The drive-thru's closed at night. Sorry for the inconvenience." The man smirked. "You're new here, aren't you?" I didn't answer. My heart was racing, and I just wanted to get back inside. "Have a good night," I said firmly, and started walking toward the door. As I turned to glance back, the car hadn't moved. Its engine idled softly, the driver's shadow still visible inside. I fumbled with the keys, locking the door behind me as I stepped back into the restaurant. "Did he leave?" Rachel asked, her arms crossed. "Not yet," I muttered, peering out the window. Then at 1 a.m., the noises started. It began softly, a faint clattering sound, like someone moving pots and pans in the kitchen. Jason didn't seem to notice, but I did. The clattering turned into a slow metallic scraping noise, the kind that made my skin crawl. "What's that?" I whispered to Rachel. "Don't worry about it," she said quickly. Her face was tense now, and her usual sarcasm was gone. The noise got louder, echoing from the walk-in freezer. My instincts screamed at me to investigate, but Rachel grabbed my arm. "Don't," she hissed. "You don't want to know." The metallic scraping from the freezer grew louder, like nails dragging across a metal sheet. I couldn't stop staring at the kitchen, waiting for something or someone to appear. Rachel stayed close, her eyes darting between me and the security monitors. Jason, oblivious as ever, flipped burgers like nothing was happening. "I can't just ignore it," I whispered. "What if—" "Don't even think about it," Rachel cut me off. "Whatever's in there isn't something you want to see. Trust me." I wanted to push her for more answers, but my thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into the parking lot. I peeked through the window and froze. It was the same car from before. The driver stepped out this time, his shadow stretching under the flickering streetlight. Rachel's face went pale. "He's back." Brian stormed out of the office, his expression cold and focused. He reached under the counter, pulling out the pistol he'd mentioned earlier. "Stay here," he ordered, motioning for us to stay put. The man knocked on the glass door. His face was partially hidden in the shadows, but his grin was unmistakable. "What's in the freezer?" he asked, his voice muffled but clear enough to send a chill down my spine. Brian walked to the door, gun raised. "Leave now," he barked. The man didn't flinch. Instead, he pressed his face closer to the glass. "You're not going to tell them, are you?" Brian's jaw tightened and his hand trembled slightly. Suddenly, the man chuckled softly, stepping back into the shadows. "See you soon," he said before disappearing into the night. The freezer's metallic noise stopped, but the silence felt heavier. I realized then, this was just the beginning. It was just another Wednesday night in January, the kind of evening where the winter air cuts right through you no matter how many layers you wear. I remember the stillness of the evening, the silence in the Wendy's, only broken by the steady hum of the fryer and the occasional beep of the cash register. The streets outside were empty, the snow falling softly, muffling any sound from the world beyond. Inside, it felt like time had slowed, like we were all waiting for something that I couldn't quite put my finger on. I'm Rachel Turner, and I've been working at Wendy's for about 3 years now. It's not the kind of job that brings excitement or intrigue. It's all just routine. Taking orders, making food, cleaning up messes day in, day out. But tonight felt different. It was late, just an hour to go before we could close, and the place was nearly empty. There was just a single customer who finished their meal and left without so much as a glance behind them. It was me, Jake, and our manager, Carla. Jake, a high school senior working part-time, was wiping down the tables. Carla, who always seemed to be buried in her computer, barely even looked up when I called out to her. "Everything good, Carla?" I asked. "Yeah, just finish up and get ready to lock up," she replied, her voice distracted. I was cleaning the counter when Jake suddenly called out to me. "Rachel, did you leave this here?" I turned to look and saw a tray sitting on one of the tables, pristine and untouched. The fries were neatly stacked, the burger wrapped up perfectly, and the soda cup sitting perfectly in the middle of the tray. But something didn't sit right. No one had left the restaurant recently, and no one ordered food and didn't eat it. "Maybe someone forgot it," I said, walking over to check it out. But the tray looked so perfect, so out of place. "Who leaves food like this? Not a single bite taken." Jake frowned, pointing at the drink. "It doesn't even look like anyone touched it." The soda's just sitting there and the fries are perfectly stacked. I shrugged. It's probably nothing. Let's just toss it. But even as I grabbed the tray, something about it felt off. I couldn't quite explain it, but the sense of unease gnawed at me. As I walked over to the trash, I noticed a sudden, unexpected chill sweeping through the restaurant, a cold breeze that seemed to come from nowhere. My breath caught in my throat. "Did you feel that?" Jake asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Yeah, weird," I replied, trying to shake it off, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. After I tossed the tray into the trash, I tried to ignore the strange feeling lingering in the air. The coldness hadn't passed, and it seemed to be growing stronger, seeping into the walls of the restaurant. Jake and I exchanged uneasy glances as we started cleaning up, trying to act like nothing was wrong, but the silence between us said everything. Carla was still in her office, absorbed in whatever she was doing, oblivious to the odd atmosphere in the restaurant. We were almost done with the closing tasks when Carla came out to check on us. "Everything good?" she asked, sounding distracted as always. "Yeah, just some forgotten tray," I replied, trying to downplay it. Carla just nodded and wandered back to the register to count the cash, but Jake and I were still on edge. The smell from earlier, the damp, earthy scent, still hung in the air, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck prickling. Carla went to check the security footage, which was part of the routine. We all stood by the small monitor, watching the grainy footage from the dining area. At 8:15 p.m., a man walked into the restaurant. He wore a dark hoodie that covered most of his face and carried an old weathered backpack. He ordered his food, sat down at a corner booth, and placed his tray on the table in a very deliberate way. But then, something strange happened. He froze. For 5 minutes, he didn't move a muscle, just sat there staring straight ahead with no expression on his face. "This guy's weird," Jake muttered. Then, without warning, the man stood up, leaving the tray behind, and walked toward the kitchen. We all watched in confusion as he entered the back, disappearing from sight. "What the hell is he doing?" I whispered. Carla switched to the kitchen camera. The man walked straight to the freezer, opened the door, and stepped inside. But he never came out. We waited and waited. "He's not coming back," Jake said, his voice low. Carla fast-forwarded the footage, but the freezer door stayed closed. The man was gone. "Okay, that's creepy," I said, my pulse quickening. Without saying a word, Carla grabbed a flashlight. "We need to check the freezer." Carla led the way, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness of the kitchen. Jake and I followed behind, both of us feeling like we were walking into something we didn't fully understand. The air had grown colder, and I could see my breath in the beam of Carla's flashlight, each exhale clouding in the freezing space. We reached the freezer door, and I felt a strange sense of dread tighten around my chest. Carla hesitated for just a second before pulling it open, the door creaking as if it had been years since anyone had used it. Inside, everything looked normal. Boxes of frozen patties, bags of fries, and bags of frozen vegetables were neatly stacked on the shelves. But the smell, the earthiness, was stronger than ever. It hit me like a punch to the gut, making my stomach turn. It was suffocating, like the scent of wet soil after a heavy rain. "Is anyone in here?" Carla called out, her voice echoing in the cold, sterile space. There was no answer. The only sound was the faint hum of the freezer. I could barely hear Jake breathing beside me, the tension thick in the air. Carla stepped deeper into the freezer, shining the flashlight into every corner, her footsteps echoing off the metal shelves. I stayed near the door, unable to shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Then, suddenly, Carla froze. Her flashlight beam landed on something that made my blood run cold. "Guys, you need to see this," she said, her voice shaky. Jake and I stepped forward, both of us too scared to speak. Carla pointed to the floor, where something was scrawled in the frost. 3 words, written in what looked like frozen condensation. "Do you remember?" The sight of those words sent a chill through me. I didn't know what they meant, but I felt like I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't understand. Without a word, we turned and ran, locking the freezer door behind us. Carla quickly dialed the police, but when they arrived, there was no sign of anything unusual. The writing was gone. The freezer was empty. The man was nowhere to be found. We were left with nothing but questions, and that sickening, lingering smell. The next few hours felt like a blur. The police arrived, took a few statements, and searched the restaurant thoroughly, but they found nothing. No sign of the man, no trace of the strange writing on the freezer floor. They even checked the security footage again, but all it showed was the same footage from earlier, nothing out of the ordinary. The officer in charge shrugged, suggesting we just had a weird night, and left. But something inside me told me that night wasn't just weird, it was something far worse. We closed up as usual, but none of us spoke much. Carla locked up the doors, Jake stayed behind to finish his shift, and I left feeling like I was walking in a fog. The air felt thicker, heavier. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something was still in that Wendy's with us. When I got home, I tried to push the thoughts out of my head, but the smell, the writing, and the man's movements kept replaying in my mind. It wasn't until the next morning that I could bring myself to ask Carla about it. "Did you hear anything from the police?" I asked as I grabbed my things for my shift. She shook her head, looking uneasy. "No. Let's not talk about it, okay? The less we mention, the better." But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Weeks passed, but every time I worked late, the same unsettling thoughts crept back into my mind. I'd catch a whiff of that same damp, earthy smell, or hear the faint sound of a tray scraping across the counter, though there was never anyone there. If you ever find yourself at a Wendy's late at night and you see a tray left behind, don't touch it. Don't even go near it. I learned that the hard way, and I still don't fully understand what happened that night. But I do know one thing. It's not something you want to mess with. Trust me on that. It was just another night shift at Wendy's, the kind I had gotten used to over the years. The work wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. I had been at this Wendy's for almost 3 years, so I had learned the ropes. Clean the fryers, prep the burgers, serve the usual late-night crowd. The 2 a.m. crowd was always a mix of truck drivers, restless people, and a few drunk college students stumbling in for fries and burgers. Nothing exciting ever happened, and honestly, that was fine by me. It was a steady, predictable routine, one I had grown comfortable with. That was, until I got the news. My manager told me I was being transferred to a different Wendy's in Pine Ridge, a small, quiet town about 30 miles away. He said they really needed experienced staff over there. I wasn't thrilled about the idea. I'd never been to Pine Ridge, and the thought of starting all over again in a new place didn't excite me, but I had no choice. I arrived at the Pine Ridge Wendy's for my first shift, already feeling a little off about it. The store wasn't anything like the one I was used to. The building was older, with faded red trim and buzzing fluorescent lights that gave the parking lot a weird, dimly lit look. The whole place felt like it belonged in another decade. It wasn't the bright, fast-paced atmosphere I was used to. Everything felt slower, heavier. The air felt thicker, the silence more unsettling. I was working with Sarah, a girl who had been at this Wendy's for years. She was a few years older than me, but looked like she had been here forever, worn down by long shifts and the quiet isolation of the place. She gave me a cold look when I walked in, clearly not thrilled about having a new person around. "Hope you're ready for a quiet night," Sarah said, as she wiped down the counter for the 3rd time in the past hour. "We don't get much traffic after midnight." "That's fine by me," I replied, stacking some trays near the register. "I could use a break." She looked at me like I didn't understand what she meant. "You'll need it. This place gets weird sometimes." Her voice dropped lower, almost as if she was telling a secret, and there was something in her eyes that made me pause. I didn't know what she meant, but I didn't ask. Maybe she was just trying to make small talk, or maybe there was something more to her words. Either way, the unease I felt walking into the store wasn't fading. Something about this place didn't sit right with me. I tried to shake it off and focus on the work, but her words kept running through my head. The hours dragged on, and the store stayed quiet. I tried to settle into the new routine, but I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. The more I looked around, the more the store seemed off. The hours felt like they were stretching on forever, each minute slower than the last. The quiet of the night weighed on me, and the unease I felt grew. I kept trying to focus on the tasks at hand, but every time I glanced around, the store felt emptier, more suffocating. The flickering lights above, the distant hum of the refrigerator, everything seemed to echo in the silence. Around 2:30 a.m., the door chime suddenly rang. I looked up, expecting a late-night customer, but there was no one in sight. I froze for a moment, unsure whether I had imagined the sound. Then, the chime rang again, louder this time. "Is someone coming in?" I asked Sarah, who was busy cleaning the counters. She glanced up, her face pale. No one's supposed to be here this late." I felt my stomach twist. I stood up from behind the counter and walked toward the door, looking outside. The parking lot was empty except for a few scattered cars, nothing unusual. I turned back to Sarah, but she was staring at the floor, her face tight with anxiety. I brushed it off, thinking it was just the stress of the shift getting to me. But just as I was about to return to my duties, a loud crash came from the back. It was sharp, unmistakable, the sound of something metal crashing against the tile floor. My heart skipped a beat. "What was that?" I asked, my voice trembling. Sarah was already on her feet, looking at me with wide eyes. "I don't know. Go check it out." I grabbed the nearest flashlight, my palms sweaty as I walked toward the back. The kitchen was silent, everything in its place. The fryers were off, the counters clean. There was no sign of anything out of the ordinary. I stood there for a moment, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. It didn't make sense. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Slowly, I turned around and headed back to the front of the store. Just as I reached the counter, the door chime rang again. This time, someone walked in. I stepped back, startled by the sound of the door chime once again. A woman had entered, her presence so sudden that it felt as if she had materialized out of nowhere. At first glance, she seemed out of place, her appearance disheveled. Her clothes were torn and dirty, and her hair hung in tangled strands around her face. But what struck me the most were her eyes, dark, empty, as if they had seen too much and were haunted by it. Welcome to Wendy's," I said, my voice shaking despite my attempt to sound normal. "What can I get for you?" She didn't respond immediately, her eyes fixed on the counter, vacant and unfocused. There was something eerie about her silence, like she was listening to something only she could hear. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "A Baconator, fries, a Frosty, and a Coke." I hesitated, trying to keep my composure as I punched the order into the register. My hands trembled slightly as I bagged the food, feeling a chill in the air. The woman slid a crumpled wad of bills across the counter, her fingers trembling as they brushed against mine. Her skin was freezing, colder than anything I had ever felt. "You okay, ma'am?" I asked, my concern rising. She didn't answer. Instead, her hollow eyes shifted past me, staring into the distance as though she was seeing something that wasn't there. My stomach twisted in discomfort, but I quickly handed her the bag, trying not to focus on the growing unease in my chest. Without a word, she took the bag and turned to leave. As she walked out, I caught a glimpse of her sitting on the curb outside, her hands trembling as she unwrapped the food. "That was weird," Rachel muttered from behind me, her eyes flicking to the window. I nodded, but the feeling of dread that washed over me wouldn't go away. I couldn't shake the image of the woman, her hollow eyes, her cold skin, and I couldn't help but wonder who she really was. The night passed quietly after the woman left, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. I kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see her sitting there, her trembling hand still clutching the bag of food. But as the hours dragged on and my shift came to an end, I convinced myself that maybe it was just a strange encounter, nothing more. When I woke up the next morning, my phone buzzed with a news alert. I didn't think much of it at first, just another headline to scroll past. But as I read the article, my heart sank. A fatal accident had occurred just a mile down the road from the Wendy's. A car had crashed into a tree, and the driver had been pronounced dead at the scene. My breath caught in my throat as I clicked on the attached photo. The woman, the one with the hollow eyes, was staring back at me from the screen. The article didn't say much about her, just that there were no skid marks, no signs of a struggle. It was as if she had driven straight into the tree on purpose. But what struck me the most was the description of her final moments, how she had been seen wandering the streets earlier that night, looking lost and broken. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had somehow witnessed the end of her journey. Her words from earlier echoed in my mind. It's too late now. There's nothing anyone can do. For weeks I couldn't stop thinking about her. Who was she? Why had she been there? And why did she seem to be searching for something? I never went back to that Wendy's after that night, and I'm not sure I ever will. Some things, some encounters, are better left unexplained. But every time I pass by a Wendy's, I can't help but remember the woman with the hollow eyes and the chill that follows her wherever she goes. It was the summer of 2010, and I was 15, stuck in that awkward age where I wasn't quite a kid anymore, but not yet an adult. My hometown wasn't large, one of those places where everyone knows everyone, and the only real spots to hang out were the park, the local mall, and a few fast food joints. Of all the places to grab a quick bite, Wendy's was always my go-to. It wasn't just because it was cheap, it was because their burgers were unbeatable. Every Friday after school, my best friend Danny and I would scrape together whatever cash we had and head over there. We didn't have much, but it was our thing. The staff knew us by face, maybe even by name. We always ordered the same thing, a Dave's single with fries and a Frosty. It had become a tradition, and no Friday felt complete without it. That particular Friday, though, felt different. It had been a long week of school, and I was looking forward to unwinding with some greasy comfort food. When we walked into the restaurant, I could already smell the familiar scent of fries and burgers sizzling. "Yo, Nate, you got cash?" Danny asked, his voice muffled as he rifled through his hoodie pockets. "I've got like $6, I said, holding up a crumpled $5 bill and a few coins. "What about you?" Danny grinned. "I've got it covered. You getting the usual?" I hesitated, staring up at the menu. It wasn't the first time I'd thought about trying something new, but I always chickened out. That day, however, I felt like switching things up. I shrugged and said, "I'll try the Baconator this time." Danny raised an eyebrow. "Switch it up, huh? You're the guy who's been ordering the same thing since kindergarten." I laughed, a little nervous. "Yeah, I know, but today I'm feeling adventurous." He smirked. "All right, let's see if you can handle it." We made our way to the counter, our usual spot now behind a couple of moms with their screaming toddlers. The smell of grease filled the air, and my stomach rumbled louder than I wanted to admit. As we waited in line, the restaurant buzzed with its usual activity, the hum of the soda machines, the clatter of trays, and the chatter of families. I couldn't focus on anything except the anticipation of sinking my teeth into that giant Baconator. Danny and I joked back and forth about how we were both too old for this, but still couldn't resist the lure of fast food. Finally, our turn came. The cashier, a tired-looking girl who couldn't have been much older than us, gave us a distracted smile. "Hi, welcome to Wendy's. What can I get for you?" I ordered, trying to sound confident, though my stomach was already growling. "I'll have the Baconator combo, fries, and a Frosty chocolate." She punched it in, barely glancing up. I handed her the money, and Danny covered the rest with a smirk. "You owe me next time." he said, grabbing the receipt. We made our way to our usual booth by the window, where we could look out at the parking lot. It wasn't long before the food arrived, and the scent of the burger was almost enough to make me forget everything else. The Baconator was massive. Layers of sizzling bacon, melted cheese, and a juicy patty. My mouth watered just looking at it. I unwrapped the burger eagerly, taking in the familiar greasy smell of fresh beef. Danny looked at my burger like it was some kind of prize. Damn, that looks good. Yeah, it's gonna be amazing, I said, already taking my first bite. At first, everything was perfect. The taste was exactly what I expected. Juicy, cheesy, greasy, all the things that made Wendy's the best. But halfway through my bite, something felt off. The texture was wrong. It didn't taste like bacon or beef. It was rubbery, tough, almost like I was chewing on something that didn't belong. I pulled the burger away, staring at it in confusion. This is weird. What's wrong? Danny asked, his voice still casual as he shoveled fries into his mouth. He didn't seem to notice that I was no longer eating, my attention completely fixed on the burger in my hands. I hesitated, my stomach twisting. Something's off, I muttered, trying to ignore the unease creeping over me. I took another cautious bite, hoping it was just my imagination. But the texture was still wrong. The meat tasted funny. Not bad, just strange, almost chemical. I pulled the burger away again, staring at it like it was some kind of foreign object. Danny raised an eyebrow, clearly not taking me seriously. Dude, it's fast food. It's not supposed to be gourmet. No, I said, lifting the bun to inspect what was inside. That's when I saw it. Something dark and out of place, lodged in the patty. My stomach flipped. At first, I thought it was just some burnt piece of bacon, but then I noticed the shape. It didn't make sense. It wasn't food. It was a small, dark object, almost like a chunk of flesh, and it was stuck right in the middle of the burger. What the hell is that? I whispered, my voice tight as I stared at the thing, trying to make sense of it. Danny leaned over, squinting. Is that a burnt onion or something? He asked, half joking. I grabbed a napkin, my hands shaking. I carefully pulled the object out, but it didn't look like anything that belonged in food. It was small, about an inch long, and had a fleshy, sickly appearance. Danny's eyes widened as he leaned closer. Dude, is that a finger? My heart dropped. I stared at it in shock, the realization hitting me like a ton of bricks. It wasn't just some weird food item. It was a severed fingertip with a jagged nail and bits of darkened skin. Oh my God, I gasped, barely able to breathe. The restaurant was suddenly too quiet. My head was spinning, and all I could hear was the sound of my own heart pounding in my ears. I was still holding the napkin with the fingertip in it, but I couldn't seem to let go. My fingers trembled as if I was in a nightmare, but this was real. That was a real severed finger. I tried to swallow the lump in my throat, but it felt like I was choking on the shock. Danny's voice snapped me out of my daze. Nate, you've got to tell someone. That's not right. His voice was shaky now, no longer joking, his eyes wide with disbelief. I stood up so fast the booth slid backward. I'm not just sitting here, My voice cracked and I had to clear my throat. We need to show someone, the manager, now. The noise in the restaurant had died down and people were starting to notice us. I could feel their eyes on me as I rushed to the counter, Danny following close behind. The manager, a middle-aged man with a greasy comb-over, looked at us as we approached, his brow furrowing. What's going on? He asked, his voice flat. I slapped the napkin on the counter, unable to speak. Danny blurted it out, his voice almost a yell. My friend found a freaking finger in his burger. The manager froze, his face going pale. He grabbed the napkin, unwrapping it with trembling hands. As soon as he saw it, his mouth fell open. Jesus Christ, he muttered almost to himself. I don't know what this is, the manager stammered. Let me take this to the back. No, I snapped, standing up straighter, anger and fear mixing in my voice. I'm not letting you hide this. You need to call the cops or the health inspectors. Now." He raised his hands defensively. All right, calm down. I'll handle this. Just sit tight." The next hour was a blur. The cops arrived asking 1,000 questions, taking statements. The restaurant was shut down for the time being, and the staff was questioned. I sat in the corner with Danny, nursing a glass of water, trying not to throw up. My mind kept flashing to that fingertip, the feeling of it in my hand, the look of it lodged in my burger. This was no accident. By the time the cops left, I was a mess. I couldn't get the image out of my head. I had never felt so sick in my life. Danny leaned over, his voice softer now. "You all right, man?" I shook my head. "I don't think I'll ever be all right." My name is Sarah, and working the night shift at Wendy's wasn't glamorous, but it worked for me. Being a single mom wasn't easy, but it paid the bills. My son Noah was my world, and my mom helped out by looking after him while I worked. It wasn't ideal, but it kept us going. I worked at a Wendy's on the outskirts of Willow Creek, a small town just outside Pittsburgh. It was a quiet spot, with only a handful of regulars who came in for late-night snacks. Most nights, it was just me cleaning counters, taking orders, and flipping burgers. One cold Friday night, the wind howled outside as I arrived for my shift. The parking lot was mostly empty, lit by the dim glow of the streetlights. When I walked in, the smell of frying oil greeted me. Tim, one of my co-workers, was by the fryer, and Rachel, our manager, was in the back counting the register. I hung up my coat, tied on my apron, and got ready for another quiet night. By 11:30 p.m., things had slowed down. I was wiping the counter when the door chimed, and a tall man walked in. He wore a hoodie, his face mostly hidden. He didn't seem interested in food, just staring at the menu. Finally, he ordered a black coffee, which I handed to him. His hands were freezing cold, and I felt an uneasy shiver. He walked to a booth by the window, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He didn't drink his coffee, just sat there, occasionally glancing up, his eyes following me. The tension in the air grew thicker. Something about him didn't sit well with me. As the minutes passed, the man at the booth didn't move. He didn't touch his coffee, just sat there staring out the window. Every so often I'd catch him looking in my direction, his eyes lingering on me for just a moment too long. It was unsettling, like he was watching, studying me. I tried to shake off the feeling, focusing on the tasks at hand, but the tension in the air was thick. Around midnight, the man stood up and slowly walked to the counter. My heart skipped a beat as he approached, his footsteps heavy on the floor. I forced a smile, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can I help you, sir?" "You've got a kid, right?" he asked, his voice low and raspy. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. "Excuse me?" "A little boy," he continued, his lips curving into a faint smirk. "About 7 or 8, cute kid." My blood ran cold. How did he know about Noah? "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, my voice trembling despite my efforts to stay calm. The man leaned in closer, the smell of cigarettes and something sour wafting toward me. "Noah, right? I saw you two at the park last week." I wanted to scream, to ask how he knew, but I couldn't move. I hadn't been to the park in weeks. This man had no business knowing about Noah. "I don't know who you are," I said, my voice firm now, "but you need to leave." The man chuckled, an unsettling sound that made my skin crawl. "Relax, sweetheart. I'm just making conversation." Before I could respond, Tim appeared beside me, his tone protective. "Is everything okay here?" The man straightened up, his smirk fading. "No problem," he said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "I'll be on my way." He walked out, but not before locking eyes with me one last time. I shivered, unsure of what to make of it. The rest of the night felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that the man wasn't truly gone. His cold stare lingered in my mind, and every time the door chimed, my heart would race in anticipation. I kept glancing toward the entrance, half expecting him to walk back in. Tim stayed close for the rest of the shift, his presence a quiet reassurance. He kept an eye on the door too, and I could tell he was just as unsettled as I was. "If that guy comes back," he said quietly, "we're calling the cops. Got it?" I nodded, grateful for his support, though my nerves wouldn't settle. The minutes dragged on, and the store remained eerily quiet, with only a few more late-night customers trickling in. When my shift finally ended at 2 a.m., I was relieved, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Tim walked me to my car, his eyes scanning the empty parking lot. "You gonna be okay?" he asked, his voice low. I smiled weakly. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired." I started the car, the engine humming to life as I pulled out of the parking lot. My mind kept returning to that man and his strange, unsettling words. How did he know about Noah? How had he even recognized us? When I got home, I checked on Noah right away. He was fast asleep, his little chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but as I turned to leave his room, something caught my eye. A crumpled Wendy's receipt lay on his nightstand. I picked it up, my hands trembling. On the back, in jagged handwriting, were the words, "See you soon." My stomach twisted in horror. How had he gotten into my house? My mind raced, panic flooding my veins. I stared at the crumpled receipt in my hand, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of it. "See you soon." How had that man gotten into my house? I called my mom immediately, my voice shaking. "Mom," I demanded, "did you let anyone into the house tonight?" Was anyone here? She sounded confused. "No, Sarah. I've been in my room all evening. Noah's been fine. You know I wouldn't let anyone in without asking you first." I checked the locks on every door and window, double-checking that everything was secure. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows, nothing out of the ordinary. But the note was undeniable. It was right there on the nightstand next to Noah's sleeping form. I called the police, but their response was less than reassuring. They sent an officer over who seemed sympathetic but unhelpful. "Without any signs of forced entry or witnesses," he said, "there's not much we can do. We'll keep an eye on the area, but you're going to have to take precautions." The officer left, but I couldn't shake the fear. I quit my job at Wendy's the next morning. I couldn't stay there knowing that man might be out there watching, waiting for the right moment to return. Months passed, but the fear never fully left me. I installed security cameras around the house, kept the doors locked, and barely let Noah out of my sight. The unease lingered, like a shadow I couldn't escape. Every night I found myself glancing out the window, wondering if the man from that night was still out there, waiting for his next move. I couldn't forget him, and I wasn't sure I ever would.